All right. Welcome to another episode of The Close-Up, a part of the Orlando Magic HQ Network. My name is Steven Cameron, and today we have an awesome conversation. We got Dan Savage, Orlando Magic writer, on the show. We haven't talked to him in a while. I think the last time I talked with Dan on the show was either at the very beginning of the season or like during training camp or something like that. Typically, we get him on more frequently during the regular season, but just for some reason, we haven't connected until just now. It's a great conversation. We talk a lot about, kind of the journey of this Magic team, particularly in the last couple of months with the slump that they've been in and kind of getting out of that slump, where they're at now. The growth of Paolo since the injury to where he's at today, Franz as well. We kind of take a look at, what's to come with the last 13 games of play and just all sorts of different topics. But it was a really good conversation. I wish I kept recording because Dan and I talked for about another hour afterwards about, Orlando Magic stuff too. And he's just a very insightful person and comes with a very nice level-headed perspective to it all. But before we get to that conversation, I just want to shout out a few things, and then we'll get in the conversation with Dan Savage. First thing I'm going to shout out is please like and subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I know a ton of you who watch this stuff are not actually subscribed, so please subscribe. That would go a long way. The second thing is our sponsors. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from NBA, college basketball to NHL and UFC, BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every three-pointer to hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. Magic fans, listen up. Orlando Magic Radio Network pregame and postgame host Brandon Kravitz is live daily on 96.9 The Game within the zone starting at 3:30 p.m. And on Magic Game Days, he stretches that show all the way to 6:30, with the final 30 minutes being completely Magic focused. Want bonus content? Check out his Zone Heads podcast for weekly on-demand episodes. Also, Magic fans, check out our Patreon program. It's linked in the description, and we got a lot of really cool benefits that give back to you and help us out a little bit with your contributions. With all that said, Magic just beat the Cavs to end their 5-game road trip on a 3-2 record, upsetting the Cavs' 16-game win streak. Paolo is looking phenomenal. Franz is looking phenomenal. And Dan Savage and I of the Orlando Magic have a great conversation about it. Let's go Magic. All right, everyone. Like I said, we got Dan Savage on the game. I can't speak this morning. Dan, you got me nervous for some reason. We've done tons of calls together. We got Dan Savage, Director of Digital News and Written Coverage for the Orlando Magic. Dan, it's been a little bit of a while. We were talking before we hit record, like, wait, have we done a show this season? I know we talked in the off season once or twice. We talked a decent amount at the end of the last season, but have we done one this season? Maybe at the beginning. I can't remember, but it's been too long. Thanks for taking the time to join the show. How you doing?
Great timing with you reaching out right before the Cavs game to schedule this, because coming off one of the biggest wins of the season, not a better time to do it than the one we scheduled. So it may have been delayed, but ended up being the best timing possible.
Yeah, I think it was meant to be. The Magic got some extra juice because they knew we were going to record today. And like Paolo's like, hey, Steven and Dan. Steven, he's probably never even heard of me. But I know Dan's going on a show. We got to represent well for him.
Put the pressure on. That's what it's all about. Put the pressure on a little bit. And, the team bounced back. It had nothing to do with, certain guys from the Cavs talking smack. It was the fact that this podcast was on the docket that, heightened the energy level a little bit.
I'm sure Coach has his board, and his list of things that he's talking about before game, like giving them motivation, Donovan Mitchell, this and that, and that, and that, and that, going down the list. And at the very end, there's like a small little asterisk that says, Dan has a podcast tomorrow. Let's win.
Yeah, exactly. Usually, especially when I go in the opposing team locker rooms, you usually see like three keys on each side of things to do, things don't do. And I'm sure that was on Jamal Mosley's road locker room was, keep that in mind.
Keep that in mind. I think so. Well, thank you, Jamal Mosley, for keeping us in thought as you went into the biggest game, one of the biggest wins of the season so far. Magic fans, we are recording this Monday, March 17th, again, directly after the Magic beat the butts off of the Cavs, and I'm psyched about it. Dan, it's the Magic have had such an interesting journey recently, right? They had a slump that lasted way too long, in my opinion. But there seems to be a shift in momentum, right? They just finished a 5-game road trip where they went 3-2. We're going into the road trip. I think most of us, there was some skepticism about what the end results of this road trip would be, if I'm being honest. But they had some really impressive wins. They beat the Bucks. The Bucks are, let me scroll down to where I have the standings. The Bucks are 4th in the standings. They beat the Pelicans. We know that team is struggling. But then they just came off and, beat the Cavaliers last night, who were on a historic winning streak. I think it was the franchise longest winning streak of like 16 games or something like that. And they absolutely not crushed them, but they played a very good game and came out with a win at the end. And, in a very impressive way from a very impressive Cavs team. Before we get like specifically into that, I kind of want to like circle back a little bit. This Magic team for a while, almost since the new year, has been in this weird slump where they just couldn't really find a rhythm. They didn't look themselves. They, had a couple games here and there where like, hey, that was impressive. Like, all right, let's see if we can build momentum. But that momentum didn't really snowball like we would hope. And they had a hard time stringing together wins. And they still haven't really strung together too many back-to-back wins since the new year. I think they actually only have 1 game of back-to-back wins. But, they've had a couple now where there's, 3 out of 5. Looking back at, kind of the new year, going into All-Star break and a little bit after All-Star break, we know that injuries is a part of this story, right? That we can't tell this season without talking about injuries.
No.
But and Jalen Suggs injury, and then the news of how it kind of progressed and he's out, that probably was also another deflating moment to the team when he was looking like he was getting closer to return. But outside of injuries, what do you think kind of caused that slump to be what it was, and as long as it lasted, considering they had Paolo and Franz back for the majority of that kind of little bit of the run there?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's really a complex issue. You look at things like this, and often they're not one thing. Because if they're one thing, you just go out and fix them. And I know like a lot of fans will go and they'll look and they'll point to outside shooting, but I think it's a little bit more complex than that. One you touched on, we'll get it out of the way right off the bat, is the injuries. I think when you look at injuries to significant players and times that they made, like guys that you're paying a lot of salary to, that eat up a lot of your cap or that have a significant role in your offense. To the other teams that are dealing with what the Magic have dealt with are probably the Sixers and the Pelicans, and look at where they are in the standings compared to the Magic. So you may at first say, well, the Magic, I'd want to see them a little bit higher in the standings. But compared to teams who are dealing with similar injury situations to them, the Magic are actually performing pretty well in consideration. Now, you also look at it and say, well, some of those struggles came when Paolo and Franz came back, as you kind of alluded to. But, I don't know that, Paolo, the thing for him especially is he never dealt with serious injury in his whole career. This is his first kind of one. It's one of the things that made him such appealing to me as a prospect. As you look at his high school career, you look at his college career, this was a guy who didn't deal with injuries. And while that's a blessing in one sense, I think it made it tough for him, along with an injury that's tough to come back from mid-season, to kind of be used to that process. So I think that was a learning curve for him. And on top of that, when you have that oblique injury, there's not too much you can do to stay in conditioning. So I think there's a little bit of that for him and Franz coming back from that. On top of that, you had guys who were asked to play a very different role when those guys were out versus when those guys were back in. So, for example, Tristan da Silva, you're asking him to be a ball handler, to fill kind of the role of that Franz Wagner's in when he's not in there. and then you're asking him to be more of a spot up shooter, secondary, or third situation ball handler when those guys are back in. And so you have a lot of guys who have to go from doing one thing to going back and doing another. And then the thing I think that gets overlooked is you have a lot of guys who are asked to play more significant minutes than they ever have in their career because they were filling in for those guys, more minutes than they were necessarily ready for. So, you talk about like rookie walls, and a lot of times those things are more psychological. It's not like guys who are rookies are getting burnt out from physical exhaustion. It's more of that mental phrase. And I think because guys are playing bigger roles during that stretch than they ever had before, I think there's a little bit of that wall that kind of hit, and it all kind of came together at the same time as losing two of your biggest energy pushers, which are Mo Wagner and Jalen Suggs.
Yeah.
Coinciding with that. So that all kind of bubbles together to create that. And I really think, the Jalen injury hurts so much because so much of the Magic's identity is creating turnovers and using that to fuel their offense. And when you lose that, you lost something special. And when you had Mo Wagner and Cole Anthony coming off the bench early in the season, you're like, these are two guys that could be in the running for sixth man of the year. And instead, your bench kind of became a weakness because guys were elevated into the starting lineup, and you went to the thinner bench spot. And I think we saw the bench go from being a strength to a weakness during some of those stretches. So I think that's all kind of leveling out now, and that's why we're seeing better performance as the team adjusts. But I think kind of a very complex issue requires a complex solution, and I think it was kind of all those things coming together that created the slump that you were seeing.
It's, you and I were talking a little bit off camera before we started recording that we feel like there's a shift going on out of that slump right now, right? If they were still in that slump, we hope they don't revert back, but they wouldn't have gone 3 of 5 and beating, the Bucks and the Cavs on this road trip. That just probably would not have happened. And even like they lost to the Wolves, but it was a really close game. Like that wasn't
like the game they should have had.
Yeah. That wasn't like they didn't get like blown out or anything like that. That was another good performance and showing for this team, and happened to be on a back-to-back on a road trip. So it's like, I hate to say there's not an excuse there, but like there's the context to part of that loss. But yeah, it seems like they're shifting, and a part of that shift is Paolo Banchero. The Magic social this morning posted that like in the last 10 games, he's averaging 30 points per game. One of the other like heavy accounts on socials named the Lando posted that in the last 15 games, Paolo is still averaging 29 points per game. So, the impressive run, it goes back even further. And it just seems like ever since All-Star break, he is starting to find himself again. There's more confidence in his ability to drive and create contact, getting into the paint. There's, his scoring and playmaking is there. There's still areas that I think we all want to see growth-wise. I'm not saying he's like this perfect polished player yet, but he seems to be like back to form and feeling confident with his play and having these dominant moments and stretches that have just been a blast to watch ever since All-Star break. When you think about Paolo during this little bit, like what are some things that come to mind again from, a little bit before as he's readjusting after the injury to now, and just like the impact it's having on this team?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, fans can often overlook is that during the middle part of the season, especially, there's very little practice time.
Sure.
A lot of it's devoted to recovery. You have so many games, there's back-to-backs, there's travel, etc. There's very little practice time. So it's hard from a conditioning perspective when you're deep into the season to really get your legs back under you. So I think the All-Star break was so huge for this team. And I think that's why you see a significant difference with Paolo and the team post All-Star break than before. And I think that's how you started to see this team come out of the slump, because even though the homestand was a disappointment before this road trip, there were a number of games where it was really close to going the other way. And you could say this team got wins over Golden State, got wins over Memphis. Those 2 Toronto games were really close. There were a number of games decided basically by 2 points or less. The Golden State game was a little bit more, but a lot of that was inflated by free throws at the end when you're doing fouling and such. So I think there's a discernible difference post All-Star break, and I think that break helped a lot of those guys in terms of recovery, get over that type of stuff and refocus for this stretch run of the season. And then with Paolo, you could just see it. He's feeling that comfortability, that command of the floor that we saw at the beginning of the season as he started to take another step at this point in his career. And I think Paolo's at his best when he's dictating which spots he's getting to on the floor, when he wants to get to him, and just making the right play out of him. And he talked a little bit after the Cavs win where his go-ahead shot was kind of the same play that they ran before to get an open look for KCP from three. They kind of ran an iteration of that again, and he was just in so command of getting to his spot, saw the defense move, and just went up there, elevated, knocked it down. And you could see him getting to his spots on the floor. He's getting to the free throw line at an elite rate. And since the All-Star break, number 2 in scoring in the NBA, playing at such a high level. Only player scoring more than him is Shea, who's obviously playing at an MVP level. So that tells you where Paolo's at this stage of his career.
It's been so fun to watch. There was a time where he, a couple weeks ago where he had 2 40-point game plus in a 3-game stretch. He had another 40-point game on this run. I think he's had the most 40-point games since Shaq and T-Mac. I think that is a stat I read somewhere in the last handful of games. It's just been so fun to see him kind of like get back and not that I would ever question, but kind of like quiet the people who did question his ability post-injury.
And the one thing is like, how long have Magic fans kind of waited for a player of Paolo's caliber?
Yeah.
And for that matter, Franz Wagner's caliber, and to have 2 of them at the same time, and just laid out for the future. What an exciting time to be a Magic fan, because these guys are just growing, building, figuring out how to work with what's around them. And, the future, in my opinion, with the work ethic of those 2 guys is only going to continue to get brighter. So, really an exciting time to be a Magic fan, because, my goodness, the caliber of play that these 2 guys are capable in their very, very early 20s is just otherworldly. So, it's like every other night we're seeing again, which we saw at the beginning part of the season, at the tail end of the last season in the playoffs, is you're getting these stat lines where it's like, Paolo's the only guy since LeBron and Luka and Kevin Durant to do something. And so it just tells you the caliber of player that both he and Franz are being compared to right now.
And that's 100% right. It's like we've wanted this for ever since Dwight was on the team. And no disrespect to the other iterations of the Magic over the last 10, 12 years, but this is something that we've all wanted, from employees to fans, to just have these young players that their upside is so ridiculous that, we know we got it. And that's exciting. And I don't want to discredit, I know it's not many people are talking about him at the moment because he's injured, but like Jalen Suggs is a part of that. He's not the same type of offensive scorer that Paolo or Franz is going to be, but he is a 2-way monster, such like part of the heart and soul of this team with the energy that he brings. What have you seen? Okay, so we're not gonna go too deep into this, but he had the quad injury, got turned into a knee thing. I forget the name off the top of my head. Had
I don't want to try to pronounce it.
And then had a surgery to like clean some things up and get him prepared for the offseason. How's he doing right now? Is he in good spirits? What's been going on with him since he had the procedure a week or so ago?
Yeah, I think with Jalen, it's doing everything like he does, which is attacking it with 100%. He's staying very active, involved in the group chats with the guys and being part of there. So, be real eager to see him around here again on a daily basis. The team will be coming back, so we'll see if he's able to be around at all, in person for these next couple of games. But what I love about Jalen is just his attitude. I think you hit the nail on the head, which is, his energy, his defensive 2-way mindset. I think that's what's hurt the most, because when you think of the Magic's identity, it starts on the defensive end of the floor. I don't think anybody's questioning that.
Right.
It does things at elite level there. And he is perhaps their best defender, setting the tone on that edge of the floor. At the very least, their best point of attack defender. And, that can translate to games. Like you look at some of those games that they lost, and it's not hard to think, boy, if they had Jaylen, does that homestand go completely differently? I mean, is that 6-1? Because you look at who was getting buckets at the end of those games that they lost, and you go, wow, Steph Curry's going for nearly 60 points. Does he do that if Jaylen's out there? Now, maybe he gets 40, which is still a very impressive performance for Steph. And, he's a hard guy to stop. But can Jaylen help a few of those? All we needed was one more stop. I mean, if he scores in the 40s, the Magic win that game by double digits. You look at the end of the Memphis game, and you're looking at Ja Morant score some of those clutch buckets, calling over and getting certain matchup against Magic guards. Hard to do if Jalen Suggs is out there. In the early stages of a roster building for a playoff going team, often your margin of errors is thin. You're not fully developed. Like, look how long it took Boston to get to the point where their roster is as deep as it is and built around those specific guys. So the Magic are in their early iteration of that and, haven't emptied the canister of picks, et cetera, in the team building perspective. So, they're going to be a little thinner with young guys around young guys. And so it's hard to withstand the injury to a top 3 player on a team. But yeah, I mean, the future is really exciting for Jalen Suggs because I think if he were out there in a lot of those games that you alluded to, the results might be very, very different and people would probably be feeling a lot different about the team right now.
And you mentioned a lot about the defensive impact, but like we can't forget about the offensive impact either. Oh. He is, he was growing as a lead ball handler this year and, making some nice strides there. He is one of the better shooters on the team, from a volume and make percentage. He's just like someone that helps space the floor. He can do catch and shoot and, off the dribble 3-point attack, an area that people have to pay attention to is his shot. And when, for a team that already has so few ball handlers on it, like when you lose Jalen Suggs and Mo Wagner, another person who can put the ball on the floor, it's like, it just took away and has taken away a lot of options for where the ball can be and how the offense can be initiated with the ball, because you're thin there. This team is thin. So, wow, my cats are going psycho. Sorry, I'm going to leave that in the pod too.
They just adopted the mindset.
Just going wild right now.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, the Magic wouldn't have been a bottom 29th offensive team, and their shooting still probably would have had some struggles, but maybe it wouldn't have been league worst at a historic level. Didn't really want to bring that up, but that's just the facts of where this team's at this year. I didn't want this to be about a shooting episode, but that's just where they're at, and Jalen would have helped all of that.
No, for sure. And I think you look at, my good buddy, Josh Cohen did a great story with the numbers say about the Magic this season. And, the league average is currently around 36%. The Magic, have reached every time they've reached or surpassed this mark of 36% shooting from the outside, they're 13-4. While that number itself, 13-4, 17 times is a league low, their winning percentage when they do that is 76.5%, which is 6th best in the NBA. So it's showing you when they can shoot the ball effectively pretty well. And I would assume Jalen would help with that. Mo Wagner, with his ability to go down there and create opportunities, not necessarily always having to shoot from the outside like that himself, although he is a capable 3-point shooter. You add those guys in that mix, and they probably do that, a number of more times and continue to elevate that win total. So I think both of those injuries played a role in it, but I still do think that it's something that's not overlooked, that this team understands and continue to address in the offseason, just like they did last offseason by adding, KCP and drafting a guy in Tristan da Silva and retaining certain players that they felt could help them from 3-point range, like Gary Harris, who had a strong finish to last season. So I don't think that it's unknown to this team that they've got to get better there. I think, that'll be an area. But I think at the same time, you have to keep what the identity is, and you can't just sacrifice your defense for short-sighted offense at the same time.
Yeah, and we're not talking about the offseason right now. This is not that podcast, but we know this is on Jeff and Anthony's mind. Like they said it on, in the conversations they had publicly after the trade deadline, that they know 3-point shooting is something that needs to continue to be addressed and worked on this offseason. And as that gets sorted out, imagine what this team would look like and how Paolo and Franz could operate even more with more spacing on the floor and teams just not packing the paint. It's going to be a beautiful thing when it happens. And yeah, Josh does a great job. I love reading his stuff. I was looking at that post this morning when he was talking about the 36% and their record. I'm like, yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, cool. We got to address 3-point shooting. They got to find themselves, maybe some personnel changes. That's a conversation for another day. But like, it's going to be great when it happens, and I'm pretty psyched on that.
And I think those numbers will just continue to get better. They are towards the bottom of the league right now in a lot of those categories, but I don't think that even with the way the team's constructed, that those numbers are built. Like you look at the team, which hasn't had any significant losses other than Jalen and Wagner, and they played the second half of the season shooting league average.
Yeah.
So I think we saw a lot of lows as guys were asked to do more and play more minutes, play better defense than they've been asked for perhaps stretches of their career. All that takes a toll. The sum of all that adds together. But I think now as Paolo and Franz are getting back into their flow, creating better looks for those guys, I think those numbers are going to continue to elevate. And we'll see, perhaps more performances like we saw during this road trip where some of those numbers go up. Bring that home at the Kia Center, some of those familiar sightlines, get some time there. And I think we'll see those numbers get closer to league average for maybe the second half of the season.
That would be nice. There's 13 games left before the play-in. The team is currently 32-37, 0.5 games away from the 7th seed in the standings. And they're likely they're not likely. They're going to be a play-in team and have to play their way into the playoffs. I don't see a way of them, unless they go on a crazy run, I don't see a way for them to get into that 6th spot and avoid the play-in.
Crazy things have happened.
That's true.
Crazy things involving Detroit have happened. And, Indiana, who's also there, and Milwaukee, so you never know. But I think, the quest for the Magic at this point has to be just internal of looking at yourself and trying to make sure you're the most optimized team potentially possible for the playoffs. And, if you do that, I think either you'll be hosting the first play-in game, which is ideal, that you have two, in worst case scenario, you have 2 play-in games at home, or you work your way out of that due to a collapse of another team, etc. So, I think for this Magic team, it's just focusing on replaying their brand of basketball, which we know starts on the defensive end, and then having the offense continue to evolve, but still not losing sight of that they're at their best when that defense generates their offense.
Totally. Speaking of defense, I want to bring up a couple of players right now.
Good.
And I didn't mention this to you beforehand, but I was thinking about it earlier. Jonathan Isaac and Goga Bitadze, they are guys that are, known for their defense. Jonathan Isaac particularly, he's one of the better defenders in the league when he is on. But recently they've had some interesting things going on with their minutes. Like last night during the Cavs game, Jonathan Isaac played the first half and Goga played the second half. What's going on there? I don't really know how else to frame that question. Then what's going on with how they've been used recently? Are they just kind of like, my initial thought? Sorry, let me just give my initial thought, then I'll let you run. My initial thought is maybe they're just trying to manage their minutes going into the playoffs so their bodies can feel fresh. It's been a long season. They play a physical position and they might be a little banged up, so they're just trying to preserve them a little bit. But Goga also hasn't looked fully himself since his earlier injuries a month or so ago. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on what's going on with them. I mean, it worked last night. I don't know if it'll work like that every night, staggering one in one half and one in the other, but it's just interesting to see how they've been utilized recently.
No, you have I think it's a combination of all the things you mentioned. Obviously we're getting later into the season, making sure guys are ready for the postseason. You're looking at these guys playing a lot more minutes than they're typically used to. Goga went from being, the guy on the back of the bench to start the season to in the starting lineup for a significant stretch, asked to play, a number of minutes when Mo Wagner, Wendell Carter were down. Jonathan Isaac, I'm going to knock on wood here, has stayed, predominantly healthy for, the biggest stretch of the season. So, in shifting his body and all the things he was asked to do to stay healthy. So I think that was, is part of it. And then, some of it is matchup based. You look at the Cavs, those numbers are probably different if Evan Mobley's in the rotation and they're playing two bigs. The Cavs played a little smaller with Mobley being out. So some of that's into it. Some of it's, long road trip, a number of games away from home. It's an afternoon game after a flight from a back-to-back. So, all that stuff kind of plays into it a little bit. And I think the major focus is just making sure that those guys are ready for the postseason.
That makes sense.
And some of it got hot too. You look at like Caleb Houston coming off the big shooting night. If you're trying to create some floor spacing around Paolo and Franz, you want to continue to get a look at those guys. But the Cavs were playing, small in some stretches, and I think they wanted a number of guys to be able to throw out at some of the pick and rolls that they were running for Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland down the stretch there as well.
That makes a lot of sense. I want to touch back to something you mentioned about Goga and like the most minutes he's ever played. Just put some context there for the listeners. He's played 12,037 minutes. The most he's ever played in a season before. And the season's not over yet. There's still 13 games to go. And this is regular season. The next closest minutes he's played was last season, where he played a total of 957 minutes. So he's way cleared the amount of minutes he has ever played before in a season. So I think that you're 100% right where you mentioned like his body is just probably catching up to the volume of play that he's had to do, and coach and the health staff are probably just monitoring that a little bit. So that makes a lot of sense too. It was great to see Jonathan Isaac in that first half yesterday. He looked like really, really solid. He's had a little bit of an up and down year in my perspective, where, some games we really do see that like elite defense difference maker. And then a lot of other games, just like, okay, you did your job, but it didn't like, change the course like it has. And so many times that we saw last year. But I'm hoping that he continues to just kind of like have more of those Jonathan Isaac moments as we get towards the end of the season into the play-in and the playoffs. It's going to be fun. And shouts out to the medical staff with keeping him healthy all season. That's, for two years in a row now, we have had a pretty healthy Jonathan Isaac going into the postseason, which is great. Dan, there's 13 games left. And, like we said, there's the Hawks are in front of them by 0.5. Then the Pacers are in the 6th seed with 37 wins and 31 losses as of today. So there's a little bit of a gap there. But what are you wanting to see from this team outside of wins? Like, I think we all want that. But what are you looking for in this team the last little bit? And what do you think Coach Mosley is going to try and do? Again, outside of wins and these last little bits going into the playoffs, because typically we see like rotations get a little bit smaller around this time, and we're still seeing like these bigger 10, 11 man rotations. So I'm just like, obviously injuries are a part of all of that, but I'm just kind of curious to like, what are you hoping to see during this last little bit, as they start to get to the finish line?
No, you're right, because injuries are a part, because if you have Jalen Suggs and Mo Wagner in there, the rotation's probably no question a little bit tighter from that perspective. But aside from that, what I really want to see from this team is that suffocating defense we saw down the stretch against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Because look, you're not going to see much of a better backcourt than Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell in the postseason, and they struggled in stretches down the fourth quarter stretch of getting the ball across half court and finding the offensive set that they were trying to get into, because guys like Anthony Black and other members of the Magic were creating nightmare scenarios for them and generating turnovers and allowing the Magic to come back into that game. So I want to see that type of defensive effort consistently, because this team's capable of it. And if they do that, regardless of what's going on offensively, they'll still be in games and have a chance to win them. So that to me is where it starts. That's where this team's identity is. That's what every player that's pretty much on this roster is capable of doing. So if they play to that standard, that sets the baseline for success. And then what I want to see them continue to do is continue to be more efficient around Paolo and Franz, because those two guys are just so good at generating looks for themselves and for others. Paolo just going downhill and either getting a look at the rim, getting the free throw line, or kicking it out to other guys. Franz just being very methodical and kind of picking apart teams. If they do that, I think the offense is going to be plenty of fun with the way that those guys are getting in their flow. They just need the efficiency around them. So seeing guys like, Wendell, Corey Joseph, Caleb Houston, etc., all the way down the roster continue to elevate their games and play, because we saw Dell play at a different level yesterday that he's capable of playing at. We saw Anthony Black hit some clutch open looks. KCP scored 5 of his 15 in the last 2 minutes. That's what he was brought in to do, is knock down those open shots along with playing high-end defense. Caleb Houston, to me, I was just so happy to see that for him. He's a guy that just works so hard. Coach Mosley alluded to it. He's a guy you just root for. I think, when you see people who are around it, the team-wise, who see him in practice every day, who see his habits, like just when you're in the facility and it's late, you're working on something, and this guy's coming back in, and you're like, Caleb's here again? Like, geez, that guy's a machine. He's one of those guys. Anthony Black is one of those guys. And so you just root for those guys to have success because they put in so much work. So if they continue to elevate their games as young players, which I think they're more than capable of doing, I think this Magic team is going to be one of those ones that nobody wants to play, because you just know it's going to be a nightmare every night. Nothing's going to be easy. You're going to be playing in the mud, and the Magic are more than happy to do that and play a slugfest. And as we saw when they did it against Cleveland, you give some of those guys have performances around Paolo and Franz, and I would say, Franz for the first half of that game didn't even have his best stretch, and still the Magic came away and ended a 16-game win streak for the Cavs. So just shows you what they're capable of when some of those role players elevate their games a little bit.
Who has been the biggest surprise of the season for you? Yeah.
Man.
Do a couple rapid fire questions as we wrap this up.
That's a really good question, because I think that's one that's probably shifted over the course of the season. Like at the start of the season, you'd probably be like, no question, Goga Bitadze, because this guy was going from playing, the third guy on the bench, not playing at all, to playing as a starter and a high-level starter. There was stretches where you felt like, man, when Paolo and Franz were out, that he's the second, third best player on the court at times. And I think he'll regain that as, he gets his legs back underneath him going into the postseason. So he would be an early contestant. I think Franz, with the way that he was playing pre-injury and then, has restarted to regain, where it's just not like he's playing at an all-star level, but he's at an all-NBA level.
Yeah.
Is eye-opening even for me. Like I thought, he's going to continue to progress and he'll be, maybe borderline all-star, then consistent all-star, and then work his way up there. And it's like he's kind of skipping steps on the rung on the way up. And, you don't want to say impressive without mentioning Paolo's name, but it's just like coming off that playoff run that he had against Cavs in that game 7, where the first half you're like, I'm watching one of the best players in the world play, not one of the best players on the court. You kind of saw this coming, so it wasn't as surprising, even though not surprising, but extremely impressive. So don't want to leave that out there, but all those guys deserve to be mentioned. And I'm hoping that, when the season wraps up, there's another name of one of these role players that we mention in there, because I think, Tristan Da Silva, Anthony Black, Cole Anthony, Wendell Carter, they're all guys who are fully capable of taking it up another notch. And I think if they do, and if we get a few of them that do, could mean very special things for this team coming down the stretch run here.
And all of them have had like really nice moments throughout the season. Right. I think it'd be foolish of us to admit that it's not been the most consistent season for a lot of those guys, but there's been a lot of really good moments and really good stretches where they've just looked phenomenal. And, Tristan DeSilva, clearly earning a spot in the Rising Stars spot in All-Star Weekend, and Anthony Black as well. Moments like last night with Anthony Black, you're like, yeah, they're, really special game from him, which was great. It's been fun. All right, I got a couple more rapid fire questions for you. All right. And these are like off the court. And we didn't prepare for this. So this is off the dome. You travel a lot for work. Obviously, You're with the team a little bit less this year as years past with your newborn. But what is one of your favorite media rooms that is not an Orlando Magic room, and why?
For me, leading the way is the Detroit Pistons media room. Set up like a sports bar, has a plethora of options. So the nice part about it, if you're going through the food cycle, is you have your salad bar, which has all the fixings of you're making a salad, plus like your pasta salads, like your potato salad, macaroni salad, etc. Then you go over to the main entree. So it's like whatever they're serving that changes game to game, whatever that could be, you can have. And then you go over, and because it's, they have certain sponsors there. They have their pizza, they have their wings, they have their, kind of cheesy bread, etc. And then they have chicken tenders, a nacho bar, ice cream station. So it's just loaded.
It's pretty great.
It's the flexibility there. So if you don't like what the main meal is, you have fallback options. If you just want to eat healthy, eat a salad, whatever way you want to take it, there's versatility to it. And so I think that puts it at the top of the food list. And then the atmosphere, the way that it's set up, it can be distracting because there's so many TVs. So if you're playing them on a football Sunday, and it's like, oh, wow, there's like 6 NFL games on right now. And here, like, you find yourself looking up and it's like 15 minutes, like, wait, I got to finish my preview here. Like, let me get locked back in. So great media room. The Pistons, it's funny. They changed that up and, a couple years ago, and now the team success is kind of fallen with their media room success.
The media room sets the standard. The reason why I brought that up is I was thinking about our conversation last night that that I wanted to have today. I was remembering a handful of times that I covered the Magic games in person back in the day. This was all before COVID. It's been many years since I've been in the media room. But man, that ice cream machine was always just classic. I hope it's still there. I hope people are still enjoying it. And they would offer me a meal ticket, and I would gladly accept a meal ticket, and the food was always great. But that ice cream machine, I just remember like, all right, it's halftime. I need a little boost for the second half. I'm gonna go get an ice cream, and that was
one of the best requests by Magic PR czar Joel Glass amidst the construction of the arena. I would say the outside factor for the Magic media room now, which you see different people trying to set personal records for this season. The big theme has been there's always Uncrustables out there.
Ah, nice.
So if you need a quick hit, there's sometimes grape, sometimes strawberry Uncrustables, depending on the day. And so that's become a popular commodity. I think the personal record I've seen somebody take down this season is 6.
Oof.
So, which is a lot of Uncrustables.
Was that you? Did you set the record there?
Me.
Okay.
I'm a one guy, and maybe if I have this bad habit of I'll eat my lunch, and then whenever they're serving, and often my lunch is leftovers from what we had the night before. And so a lot of times it'll be the exact thing that they're serving for dinner for that game. So it's like, do I really want to eat this 3 times in a row? So in those scenarios, I might go for a 2 Uncrustable night, but man, I can't do anything more than I'll feel sick.
That makes sense. All right. Last one. We all know like players have their routine going into game day. Sometimes they even have like a little good luck charm they stick in their sock or tie to their shoelace or something like that. Dan Savage, you were in Savage mode going into game day. You're prepped, you're ready, you've done your warm up. What is like one quirk in your routine that you have to do to go into it?
Yeah, I'm a man of routine. So like I try to wake up well before my daughter and everything like that and getting into that zone. And so like I wake up, I walk the dog, take him go for about a 2-mile walk, listen to a podcast. That kind of gets me flowing. It gets my mind thought on whatever I'm going to write for the preview that day. Go either make coffee at home or pick up some coffee, get back, do the morning routine with my wife and child. and then, head off to the training center. And that's kind of where I lock in, write everything out, kind of being in that atmosphere pulls it out. After I get all the pregame stuff done, like that early part of the day, come home, eat lunch, spend a little time with the family, try to go and do another like family walk or something because my wife works from home. So we're able to do that and go back to the arena. And that's kind of, where I'll lock in. And now doing a pregame show with Kendra, we kind of do this courtside countdown thing on Magic's YouTube, Facebook, Twitter live.
Those are great, by the way.
Each game. So then kind of meet up with her, discuss what we're going to knock out for the day. And then, next thing you know, you're in the press conference, whatever. So, and last thing is kind of the media dining. And that's always my favorite, is kind of like, whether it's on the road or home, is just connecting with people. I've been in the league, with the Magic for about 17 seasons. Prior to that, I was with NBA.com for about 2 or 3 seasons. So coming on close to 20 years in the league. So now I'm at the point where I know at least like 2 or 3 people that either cover or work for each team that travel. So it's always good to use that time to see and catch up with those people. And that's something I don't take for granted, because when we had COVID and weren't traveling as much, or, other teams weren't traveling, missed out on a lot of that. So that's something I really try to take advantage of, because that's where you get all the, you have questions or people reporting on like, why is your coach doing this or whatever? And then you're like, oh, once you get their explanation, it's like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. So you gain a lot of knowledge about the league that way. And then I try to relay that in my previews when I'm explaining in the courtside countdown. So really the part that I cherish the most is kind of the pregame connecting element of it.
That makes sense. You got to have that moment, that moment to bring you in and lock you in.
Then you have the game, post-game press conferences. I try to get that stuff out and up as fast as I can, so that way, not only for our outlets, but then for other media that's, trying to cover the Magic, if they have, you see people like yourself who do such a good job of covering the team and, maybe far away, trying to have all that content up as quick as possible helps everybody do their job a little bit better. So try to get that stuff up, as quick as possible. So that way everybody could do that and hear what the team had to say. And then as soon as do that, then kind of like a decompress mode. And those are always kind of like being punch drunk at that point, because, you're looking at how, you may have been up since 7 a.m. and now it's, 12:30 at night and you're finally on your way home. So, or if you're on the road, then it, it could be flying to another city. So those are always fun conversations at that point too.
I bet. I imagine those like just got off the, on a road trip, got to fly to another city the next, like that night. I imagine those, like the vibes on that like midnight takeoff airplane is probably pretty interesting.
Yeah. To describe like the mental state that you go, like the first thing I do now is when I get to the hotel of a road arena, especially on those back-to-back situations, the first thing I do is take a picture of my room number. Because there've been times like, you fall asleep, you wake up, you're like, what city am I in? I'm like, oh, okay. And then my first thing is to wake up, go for a walk and go for coffee. I like to get moving. And there'll be so many times when I like get back to the hotel from that coffee walk and I'm like, I have no idea. I got into this room at 3:30 in the morning. Like, what room? So I just take the photo, and that way, regardless, I'll have that in my back pocket
to avoid the awkward like front desk. Hey, this is my name, but I can't remember where I'm at.
Yeah, or because then it seems like, what did you do last night? Or but it's just like, so often you're reverting to the room number, like especially on a trip like this where it's 5 different cities, you could have room numbers in your head from all of those 4 ones, and the one that's not clicking is the one that you're actually in right now. So that's kind of my routine, both home and away.
People, listen up. If you travel often, like Dan and I myself, I travel a good amount too. Taking the photo of the room number is pretty important.
It's my first thing I do.
I've done that once or twice, but honestly, I'm more of the guy that like, I'll just forget it, go to the wrong floor and then like get confused and then just go ask the front desk. I have no problem doing that, unfortunately, but I'm not on the road nearly as much as you are. So you got to be on that pace a little bit better than I am. So Dan, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to speak with us. This is going to be a good conversation, I think, for many Magic fans to listen to and enjoy. 13 games left for the regular season. We're in the final stretch. I'm feeling pretty good that the Magic are going to end this season on a good uphill run after what's been a little bit of a rocky season so far. That's going to do it for this episode of the Close Up. Magic fans, I appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you tune in to everything that Dan Savage and the Orlando Magic media team do. They do a phenomenal job. Like Dan was mentioning, they got the pregame show, which that can be found on YouTube. And where else, Dan?
And on Facebook Live, Twitter Live as well. So keeps growing. There's so many different social networks. Who knows? Maybe it'll be on Twitch one day, etc. So we keep trying to see, how far we can extend it without, overlooking fan comments. So trying to make sure that everybody who's watching who has a comment or a question, we can try to get to, and been able to do a pretty good job of that. I feel like that's something that's only growing, and it'll get better as the season goes on. And, it should be even better as we get to the playoffs and do a few extra special things. So the way I would look at it, Magic fans, to close it out, is we've had so many different segments of this season. There were like those first 5 games where everybody was healthy.
Paolo 50 bucket.
Yeah, then we had the segment where Paolo was out, but Franz was cooking. Then we had the segment where both guys were out and finding miracle ways to close out wins. Then there's the readjustment phase. And then there was a slight slump, and now, a successful road trip. So I'm looking for this last segment, since we've already had like 4 seasons in one, this 5th season to be like, holy cow, when this team's clicking on all cylinders, they're a lot better than a lot of people thought. So that's what I'm expecting for this last 13 games. Let's make it a fun 13 games.
It's going to be good. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks again for jumping on, Dan. I really appreciate it. Magic fans, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Peace.